Hello, everybody. I'm Paul Beckwith, and I'm very pleased to have a chat with Nick Breeze. We're live at the COP29 in Baku, Azerbaijan, and the Climate Emergency Forum is here thanks to the International Society for Ecological Economics for badging us to allow us in. So just a little bit about Nick, who I met for the first time at the Paris Climate Conference in 2015. And Nick, I would say, is one of the regulars at COP now, as I am myself. So Nick is working. He set up a group an organization he calls ClimateGenn, which is creating real-time journalism on a wide range of climate issues with the primary aim to seek depth and understanding, finding answers and possible solutions on climate issues. The journalism is presented mostly through interviews with various experts in numerous fields, including scientists, politicians, business leaders, activists, and many qualified experts in the field. And Nick has a podcast, ClimateGenn. So Nick has a book out recently. It's called COPout: How Governments Have Failed the People on Climate. And I've read it. It's awesome, I think. Former Chief Scientific Advisor to the UK government, Sir David King, says it's a must-read for all of us who care about a manageable future for humanity and the ecosystems we depend on. And Sir David Attenborough has said, "Congratulations on the title. I can't believe no one has made use of its appropriateness before." And I thought that was an interesting, a good comment, because it's COPout: How Governments Have Failed the People on Climate. So here we are again at the COP, Nick. This time it's version 29 in Baku, Azerbaijan. So what do you hope to accomplish at this COP?
Well, I think in most of the discussions that we've had to date, there's always been this sort of elephant in the room around the US elections. And although there are some major themes around climate finance and Article 6 with the carbon accounting mechanisms and things, what I'm really pleased is that this isn't a repeat of Marrakesh. In Marrakesh, when we arrived just after Trump got elected the first time, the energy was really sucked out of the room, and it looked like everyone was just about to throw up the whole time. This time, it's not like that. There's a lot of resilience, and there's people here, big people. I mean, we've had the CEO of ExxonMobil saying that he's going to try and talk Trump into staying within the Paris Agreement, that they don't want to try and get rid of the new methane pledge that was put out by the EPA in the US yesterday. So these things are quite major because of the headwinds we're sort of moving into. But it's also other countries doubling down. The UK, for once, has given us a reason to be sort of moderately proud of their presence at the COP. They've made some pretty strong commitments on reducing emissions by 2030, phasing out fossil fuels, etc. So these are big things that I think are really good to make this COP worthwhile. Anything else? I think it's really watching, because we've been so let down by the politics at the national levels. I think seeing the subnational level go to work and seeing people self-organising, those are the things that I think are really exciting as COPs move forward. There's different layers, and there's a lot of talk about California self-organising as the 5th largest economy in the world, how they're really... there's even sort of rumours about them forming their own delegation. And there's this kind of momentum that we've been missing for so long, I think.
We're getting more and more extreme weather events around the world, and just some examples of this are, of course, massive hurricanes Helene and Hurricane Milton in the U.S., the massive torrential rains and flooding in Spain, and I think you've experienced some of these yourself being in Spain. And there were just large wildfires in Southern California that destroyed many structures in Camarillo, which is just north of LA. And the list goes on and on. So I think more and more people around the world are experiencing it. In Ottawa, where I am, we've had tornadoes in the last few years. We've had a very, very large derecho. We've had torrential rains leading to sort of localized flooding, nothing like Spain. But I think, and also no ice on the canal, no skating, which was unprecedented. So we're all seeing changes. So what sort of things have you been seeing in Spain? I think you mentioned oysters, die-offs and things.
Yeah, one of well, I can almost tell it as a bit of a story, actually. I walked into the local marine biology centre, there's a station in a village where I'm staying at the moment, and I went out with the chief on his boat around the river valley. And what we saw, and he showed me this really clearly, really visually, is that the heavy rains that we're getting because of the ocean heat wave in the Atlantic is desalinating the coastline. And then you add that to ocean acidification and the changes in wind patterns, and there's a cascade of climate impacts. And that cascade of climate impacts has basically wiped out all the mussel populations. They've wiped out the clam populations, and amazingly, the local fishing group, they're licensed fishermen. They've kind of been demonized in the local community because they've been fishing illegally, because they're trying to cut back on fishing. But at the same time, they can only work officially for 15 days a year, and they're being subsidized for the rest of the year because there's simply nothing there for them to catch. And the local authorities are giving them money to buy clams, baby clams from hot climates, drop them in the local waters, and they leave them for 3 years and then fish them, which is the opposite of sustainable. So what you're seeing is a breakdown in the communities and in the marine ecosystem, all because of a cascade of climate impacts. And this is slowly spreading towards the south, moving down towards Portugal. And the further you go south, you've got some really big fishing industries. And the knock-on, what you're seeing is that everything is connected. It starts with the emissions from all of the fossil fuels. It heats the oceans. The oceans then change all of the ecosystems that impacts the fishermen's lives, which actually changes the politics because people don't understand what's going on, become more susceptible to misinformation. And what we're seeing is this really sort of complex changes in Galicia, where I'm located. So yeah, it's been absolutely fascinating to watch.
Yes, we're certainly seeing all these massive changes. Now, I remember vividly back to COP, the Paris COP, because we shared a room the second week. Like, I had problems with my accommodation the first week, and you had space in your place. So, and I can vividly remember us talking about books, and we were saying I was saying I should write a book about climate, and you said you should write one about COPs or something, and you were going to title a book called Climate Nutters, I think, about some of the personalities of people, including ourselves, who go to these climate conferences. Are we sane or are we climate nutters? Now, you didn't use that title. You came up with a better title, but did you consider the title? And do you remember, some of our discussions? And I mean, I admire you because you've got the book. I haven't written a book yet, so you're putting me to shame here. I have to get cracking. So what was it like to write that book? I mean, was it a lot of fun, or was it just like pain and hardship? Or I mean, do you have a brilliant memory, or did you take notes throughout the years of some of the stories that you have in the book? Because the book is very personal. Like, it looks at the COP from a human point of view, and who you met, who you interviewed, who you collaborated with. So it's very readable, very personal, lots of funny stories. I'm giving you a really big plug because I just loved it. But anyway, tell us a bit about the process. And are you doing another one?
Well, I remember a lot from that COP, and I remember particularly the place to be bar, where I think we would end up on quite a few occasions, and you would always say, "No, I don't. I don't drink that much beer," as you were ordering your next one. And then, we discussed the idea of a book called Climate Nutters, and I felt that it was almost like a contract that I had to write it in the end. And so what happened was I have a lot of notes because I try to write. I might use stuff for articles, so I write a lot of impressionistic stuff, which is like the glue around everything else that is literally recorded here. Because if you think that everything that happens at a COP is pretty much documented, so from that side of it, I was pretty safe. But the notes and memories were the glue, and then I think we had quite a good time at that COP because it was a very optimistic COP in a way. And we all knew the faults with it, but there was some fun to be had, and some big names that I had the pleasure of listening to, which I also go through in the book. And it was after Glasgow, and you were at Glasgow as well, and there was an author from the UK, from the US, that I was interviewing, and he asked me about the COP, about Glasgow, and I gave him my view, and he said, someone should write this up in a gonzo style. And I suddenly thought, well, that took me straight back to Climate Nutters. So I wrote the it was the start of 2022, I think, and I moved apartment in Italy, and a big heat wave came in, and we were absolutely scorching, and I could only really work at night. So I just said to my partner, look, we've got a contract here, we're going to be here for a bit. In that time, I will write this book. So I sat up at night with glasses of wine, hammering away on my keyboard until the early hours every day. But it was actually the publisher who changed it to COPout. From Climate Nutters. And two people have said to me, "Oh yeah, I think I prefer the Climate Nutters."
Yeah, I mean, Climate Nutters is great. So let's go back to what that Paris COP, because it was a huge one. I mean, people talk about, when they think of a COP, they might think of Paris, because in Paris, what the Canadian government had just become liberal. We're back in the climate world after a conservative government, and at the COP, the big focus was on setting the 2 degrees Celsius target. And then I think the Canadians had a big influence on having aspiration to get 1.5, and that was in collaboration with the Pacific Island states. So here we are that was in 2015. So here we are in 2024, and this year is probably going to be 1.55, maybe 1.6, already ahead of 1.5. And people are now saying that we're going to probably reach 2 within the next decade or so. So I see signs. I walk around this COP and I see a lot of 1.5 references still. So it seems absurd to me to see the 1.5 references still. So, I mean, have you thought about that or talked to some of the UN people about that?
Well, yeah, the head of the IPCC, who's here, Jim Skier, he said last week 2 weeks ago, in the mainstream media in the UK, that 1.5 has gone. 2 degrees will probably be gone soon, and we're marching straight up to the pledges. Only reach about 2.7, but we're marching over 3, and civilization is not resilient to anything like that. It doesn't look like we're that resilient to 1.5, to be honest. So, I mean, yeah, I think it's a really tough one, because if we've gone past it for good, then what does it tell us about, we are effectively an overshoot if we're using the 1.5, because a lot of people want to use the 1.5. In that case, we're an overshoot, and I think we need to be talking much more about that. I think there's a lot of discussion in the sidelines about interventions, and some people are for and some people are against. Many scientists I've interviewed are for research. Not very many are against research, but they're saying that even if someone wants to use it, and someone will, we need to tell them what lever they can't pull as much as one they might want to pull. So we are sailing blind into a very uncertain future. The 1.5 thing to me is a bit academic. It doesn't really translate very well into the real world. I prefer what you were talking about, what you've got hanging around your neck, which is the actual concentration, real data. Yeah, I mean,
that's parts per million CO2.
This is incredible. Huh?
Yeah, you can't.
So, what's hanging around your neck is giving us a real reading of 1,464 parts per million of CO2 in this room, and these kinds of data is much more important than 1.5 or 2 degrees, because we can actually see what we've got to do. It gives us a sort of guideline to what we've got to do, and I think the whole discussion around interventions shouldn't be on the fringes of the COP. It should be moved much more into the mainstream, into the centre. And I'd be really interested in your thoughts on that, because I know it's something you talk about.
Yes, in the past I've talked about what I call the three-legged bar stool, where we have to slash fossil fuel emissions is one leg. The second one is we have to deploy carbon dioxide removal at scale to pull carbon dioxide and also methane out of the atmosphere to lower the forcings of the warming. And but we've left things so late that I think that we have to deploy cooling methods like solar radiation management to buy us time to do the other two things. So I call it the three legs of the bar stool. Now, I've really noticed in this COP there's a lot of discussions on the solar radiation management, also lots like panels on the ethics and how do we do it, and the science, and also the same thing for carbon dioxide removal, and including carbon dioxide removal not just from the atmosphere but from the oceans, which is probably, I think, easier to do. So the tone has completely shifted on these methods. I talked about some of these things in some press conferences 10 years ago at the COP, and I became a big climate nutter because I talked about these things, and now the ideas have become mainstream. So I think we absolutely have to do it because we're risking global food shortages. I think, with a little bit more disruption and simultaneous disruption because of the way the jet stream configuration is, and we can be looking at global food shortages within a decade, I think.
And I do remember when I interviewed you at Paris, which is in the book, you were the only person, I think, in Paris at that time who was talking about this, and it kind of seemed inevitable that this would become a bigger subject. And I mean, you're more or less, if I got you correctly, you're advocating for research to be deployed, yeah, and you made a very good case for it. And my position, and I feel much more like a reporter in the sense that I want to hear the best articulated cases from both sides, and I think it's only in the last couple of years we're starting to hear articulated cases in support of research for geoengineering coming from global south countries like Ghana, countries in Central America, in Asia, and they're basically saying, if this is taken off the table, let's say by the IPCC or something, or people of that effect, then it's another example of global north countries making decisions on behalf of the global south when they're already committed to massive destruction. And I think these are arguments that we need to be hearing in the mainstream, but also the counter arguments. What are the big objections? Because if it is a mistake all right through and through, and there's a serious case for that, then I think it needs to be added in.
I'm going to ask you. We'll close up soon, but I'm going to ask you to come up with, say, a couple of your most memorable things that have happened, whether they're humorous or whatever, at all the COPs that you've been to. And I'll give you mine first. My very first COP was Lima, Peru. I was invited by Stuart Scott. He said, he had loads of air miles. He said, I'll get you down there. And he'd rented a space in a convent, and he had about 7 or 8 people that he'd invited and convinced to go and stay in the convent and go to the COP in Lima. But one of the conditions of me going is he brought a polar bear suit. And I had to walk around the COP for several days in a polar bear suit. That was one of the conditions for me going, and it was, of course, extremely hot in Lima, Peru at that time of year. So I'm sweating under this suit, and there's pictures. If you go online and look at Lima, Peru COP, you'll see the polar bear. That was me, basically. So that's the very first COP. And I guess let me say, of course, Glasgow was the ceremony with Stuart's ashes spread, and then the wind blew them back on me, and you said, you were looking at me, and I said, well, I think Stuart's still with us. I mean, that you can't top that. But this COP, let's talk about last night. I mean, we found a London pub, and we went to the Cryosphere Pavilion, and there were some people there, and we talked to them and said, there's this great pub, come and join us. And we had yourself, and we had Sean Fitzgerald, and we had a whole bunch of people. So all these people who didn't know each other, some of, half of us did, but the other half didn't, we met. So my point is that COP is all about meeting people, establishing connections, and trying to get change. And it's hard to do that in Zoom calls. It's hard to do that if you're not meeting people face to face. So I think, when people say, well, why are you going to COP? The air miles, the fuel expenses, the fuel burning, you're contributing greenhouse gases, what's the point of the COPs? Our levels of greenhouse gases are still going up. So I guess that's my best answer, is that it's the meeting with people, and eventually we'll take action enough to bend the curve, I guess, on the gases. So I think that's the part that I like most about the COP. It's like chatting with people, making friendships, and the human contact. I think we're getting less and less of it in our society, and it's to our detriment, I think. So how about you? What are some of your favorite?
I mean, it would be remiss not to mention Stuart. He was a major component of my early COP experiences. I think when I first arrived in Paris, I was sharing a room with Stuart, and he didn't tell me until I arrived. He probably knew that I would have a fit. But I went into the room, and he said, right, have you got wax earplugs? And I said, no. And he said, why? And he said, I snore really badly, so I had to go out and buy some. And he wasn't lying. But then I went to sleep, and he's quite high wired, Stuart. So at one point in the night, I get up to go to the bathroom, and I'm really fast asleep. I'm in a complete drowsy state, and I open the door, and he's sat on the loo with the light on, within his boxer shorts, working on his laptop. And I think I screamed at him. And it was just this whole series of this sort of drama. It was like a sort of cross between Monty Python and Blackadder in this hotel room. And so that was one thing. On the subject of why do we keep coming? I think you're right about human contact. I think there needs to be a hub for so many disparate voices around the world. And last year, one of my sort of climate heroes, if you like, it was Salim al-Haq, and he died just before the COP. And I've been interviewing him for many years, and he always gave me these insights into the global south, the most vulnerable nations, this kind of stuff. And in Egypt, he said, I asked him about, do you feel disheartened coming here when you get so much pushback? Every year the loss and damage is delayed, or you get the account but not the money, this kind of stuff. And he said, look, this is the only forum in the world where the most vulnerable nations get to sit at the table with the big guys. He said, we don't always get listened to, but we don't have this at the G20, we don't have it at the Security Council. This is the only forum. So in a way, by us showing up and paying attention to what's going on, we are supporting the most vulnerable nations on Earth who are living through what we've caused in the global north. And especially, as a Brit and as a Canadian, we're both we've got big legacy emission problems. So those are my sort of main reasons.
I tell people that that I meet and know in Canada that that I tell people they won the lottery basically to live in Canada, and I think I can tell Americans that as well now that living in Canada, we won the lottery. I'm sorry that you have to live in America right now. And some Americans actually have been apologizing and saying sorry, that for our politics and so on. So it's a strange world. So but I mean we're here. We are conveying information on what's happening at COP to a wide range of people, and I think that's very important, so people realize what's going on and happening. Anyway, Nick, as always, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on, and I want to thank all of our viewers out there. I want thank you for paying attention. Thank you for coming to our Climate Emergency Forum channel, and please consider subscribing and sharing this information to people far and wide. So thanks again.